Being a high school math teacher, I often encounter math as not the favorite class to go to of the day, and math anxiety and all the things that people hear about with high school math. I've long been a believer in the struggle is how you learn. The frustration I felt is the disconnect between what I believe the students can do and what I used to think they were willing to do. So I had this perception that it was an intrinsic motivation obstacle that they controlled and I had no influence over. At least I couldn't figure out how to influence it. But learning what we've learned in this class, reading Make It Stick, and some of the other resources that we've been exploring, they don't entirely control it because they don't understand it. So understanding what's actually going on in the physiology of their brain and what kinds of learning strategies can overcome obstacles and making sense of that for them has actually helped the students be more willing. It wasn't that they were unwilling before, they just didn't know how to engage. And I was frustrated because I didn't think I knew how to teach them to engage. And now I feel like I have strategies where I can. So we spend the first couple weeks of class every semester learning about how our brain works, generally, but also in terms of when you're trying to learn math, and then keep talking about that. And it's made a big difference with how the students approach it, how I give them feedback, and how we learn together.
I think we've done this in response to lack of student agency with the hopes of increasing student agency and helping them to become more active and participatory learners, and recognizing their sort of stake in the game.
These other types of tools that students can use to help them more effectively learn. And so I was drawn into this class because of the motivation piece, because the students that I work with are often not motivated because their experience is that they're not successful. And I wanted to, how can I motivate them? That's really what drew me into taking the class.
The study strategies I feel like are invaluable. When you tell a student to go home and study, what does that mean? I can give them concrete strategies that only take 5 to 10 minutes to introduce to them. It's very visual.
So I think M3 has helped me to help my students become more resilient and reflective learners, that we engage, we set out, we have a task set before us, we identify what the task requires of us, the skills, the content, and then we make a plan, and then midway through we talk about, is the plan working? And if the plan's not working, let's change it. Or how do we change it? And so we problem solve that. And in the end, then we look at the outcome, and does the outcome match the effort put in? And I think that's the real disconnect that a lot of students have, is that they're unwilling, or we don't take time to look back from the end, back at the process, and identify where the strengths were, where the weaknesses are. And we often recreate the same bad habits over and over again, or the same cycle, we redo the same process and expect different outcomes. So M3 has allowed me, in terms of the metacognitive piece, it has allowed me to help students recognize their strengths as learners, their deficits, and then work from those places of deficit, and to plan their work better, and to engage.
And you do have control over what you learn. And the things about what you pay attention to, what you allow yourself to be distracted by, your emotional state, all those things have physiological impacts within your brain that you don't control, but some of the things that cause those physiological impacts you do control. And so I think that when we start, I'm hoping that as I see students again in future classes, which luckily happens here, we won't have to start from scratch. But when I see a student for the first time, there are lots of them who say, I'm just not a math person. And so that's sort of the biggest thing that we have to overcome. Well, there aren't really any math people. There are people who have put the work in and have struggled and made the mistakes and learned from the mistakes, and you can be one of those people too. And if you haven't been one of those people, let's talk about why and how to change that.
And how are you going to do that? You need to make a plan. You need to stand outside of yourself, look at yourself, figure out what needs to happen, and then do it. So that is sort of an example of really helping kids think about standing outside of themselves and analyzing and being reflective in a way that kind of makes sense to them. And there are things that I've done with students to show them that, and we talk about bike riding and learning to eat as a baby and all of these things, learning to walk. These are all things that they struggled to learn to do, and they don't remember it, but as they are now automatic. So I kind of make that connection between things that they can do now automatically that they don't even think about, things that they are trying to get better at, like playing the saxophone or playing the clarinet, things they might aspire to start learning how to do, so that they can understand that everything is a continuum. And they, as Julie was saying, they can decide to start playing the violin. They can decide to start doing something that they haven't done up to this point, that there is no such thing as I'm not a math student or I'm not a science student.
Like, okay, but how do I help them learn to approach things in the way that you're talking about, with an open mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset, understanding how important reflection is and looking back on what went well and what didn't and how it has a benefit going forward? How do I teach them that? And this course wasn't math related and seemed to be planning to do that. And as we got into some of the readings and some of the activities that we did, both in meetings for the class and outside between the two of us, I felt like I actually had some tools that could get me there. I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't have a path to do it. I still think the path is being made up as we go. But I feel like the roadmap is starting to come into view, and I think that that's been helpful to students, as opposed to keep an open mindset and then, what then? So the practicality of some of what we read that I could actually take into class the next day and try it out and see what happened.
But I think it also provides them, and they begin to recognize where their strengths are, and they also begin to feel a real ownership and a responsibility for their successes, and it helps me to help them own their failures. Like, it doesn't happen by magic. That was one of my aha moments. Like, oh, wait a minute, no, this isn't just me being your cheerleader or saying think good thoughts. It was actually practical. There was some practicality behind it that it made learning easier.
And as the year went on, 20 of them a lot, and one of me. There was I tried to give them work time because it was a long block, and as the semester went on, more and more often, they were chatting because they're freshmen, but they were in between the social chatting. They were actually talking about the math, and so I would overhear conversations of, I had written a question to Johnny, and Johnny was asking Susie what she thought about that question. And I'm sitting there going, wow, that's kind of cool. It wasn't intentional, and I don't know how much of it was related to M3. The way I give feedback was definitely related to what I learned in this class.